Okay, I just turned the camera on.
Uh,
So, you would like to speak about air systems.
yeah, I feel like air systems are something that I know as much about as anybody, and I still think they're a good idea in certain circumstances. And I I want to talk about this not because I think I'm trying to get whoever watches this to go build air systems, but I think it's sort of worth thinking about because the good way to think about solar is using a broad range of imaginative ideas and look for the low-hanging fruit, and that's what's worth doing. And sometimes that's air systems. And in particular, there's, I'll cite an example. I have built some air systems recently, including one that's extremely large on a 60,000 square foot building, an arena whose main problem was humidity in the winter. It was just really damp inside. And so I built 13, no, 11 240 square foot solar collectors on the south wall. The first,
Run that by me again.
well, they're 240 square foot solar systems, and there are 11 of them. And the first 6 that got built were bringing in outside air. So we're taking dry outside winter air, heating it up, and blowing it into this huge building. And it pretty much took care of the humidity problem in there. This was an arena where people would, Tuesdays and Thursdays, this group of friends would get together, and they had a special herd of cows that and machinery to release them, and they'd go rope these cows. This is a building that was built for the enjoyment of this group of people by somebody with lots of money. And but it was just really damp and cold in there. And this is in northern New Mexico, so it gets pretty cold in the winter. And so building air collectors on the south wall, there's self-shading in the summer, and they bring in outside air, and which lowers the humidity in there. I also had them put magnesium chloride in the dirt, which helped a lot. Unfortunately, they did these things at the same time, so it wasn't possible to separate out the influences of the two approaches real well. It would have been nice to have built the collectors first, but the mag chloride also helped with dust in the arena, so they went right ahead and did that.
That was a storage system, the mag chloride.
No, magnesium chloride is a compound. It's used for de-icing, and it's used if you've ever been up in the national forest on dirt roads where they look sort of damp.
Yeah.
Even in the summer, that's
Yeah.
because they put mag chloride on it. If you get out of your car and lick the dirt, you'd notice it was salty tasting.
I'll have to try
And it
that.
keeps dust down. It's high. It draws moisture out of the air,
Uh,
which makes the dirt, slightly damp.
yeah.
And it keeps the dust down.
Oh, interesting.
And that's what in horse arenas. This is not a weird thing to do. It's a common thing to use magnesium chloride. You fluff it into the dirt and rototill it into the dirt, and it keeps the dust down.
So how does this relate to solar system now?
Well, it also took moisture out of the air in the arena, which was part of
I got it.
what was going on is they were watering the dirt to keep the dust down, and that further increased the humidity inside.
Sure.
See?
Yeah.
So blowing in outside dry heated air warmed the place up and lowered the humidity, but putting magnesium chloride in the dirt also lowered the humidity, partly because it lowered the amount of water they needed to put on it, because it pulled water out of the air into the dirt to keep the dust down. So it was sort of a win-win that way. Anyway, the point is that is a perfect place to use an air collector. I mean, what else would you do to solar heat this building? It's a huge metal building, 200 feet by 300 feet, and trying to get solar heat in there, unless you bury pipes in the ground or something, which would be hugely expensive, you're gonna wanna produce hot air. Well, why produce hot air with a liquid collector? Produce it with an air collector. And these were very simple collectors. They had painted steel absorber plates, but they run at 80% efficiency because they're running on outside air. And this is one of the keys to what makes fruit low hanging, is if you can run a solar collector on cool input fluid, be that air or water, then you can have a very efficient collector. And even site-built, painted surface collectors will run at 80% efficiency if you feed them outside air. Another example is cold climate schools. One of the things we know about schools these days is that they need a lot of makeup air to get the good ventilation to keep diseases from spreading. This has become particularly critical in the age of COVID. And but it's been known for a long time. You know, the school I went to as a kid didn't have any air circulation in it. We had big windows which you opened, and you know, in the winter there's a nasty draft coming in. We shared our diseases all around the 5th grade, and you know, that's just how it worked.
That's how you got it immunized.
Everybody to get sick when school started. But now we bring in outside air and we warm it up to blow into the classrooms. Well, heating it up, outside air, heating it up with an air collector is extremely, it runs at 80% efficiency. There's a new school in Alamosa where they put up solar collectors, and I think they're for outside air. But they put up liquid collectors, and you know, they've got coils in the ductwork and all that stuff. They could have done it for half the price and had it run more efficiently. Even though those collectors are very efficient collectors, they're still, you're not running them with a cool inlet temperature, so you're backing off the 80% efficiency already.
I see.
Whereas with solar air collectors, yeah, okay, the efficiency goes down as the temperature you feed them goes up.
Yeah.
But if you feed them outside air, you're still there at 80% efficiency.
Interesting. Yeah.
So part of what you need to think about is what efficiency curves mean, and why the one end of the efficiency curve is way up high there. And if you can use your solar up there in the efficient part of the efficiency curve, then you got something worth doing, even though the collector's pretty funky. So, an arena, I have a shop out here behind my house. It's got 2 little solar collectors I built on it. Both of them have little blowers on them, and heats my shop. Doesn't heat it up at 8 o'clock in the morning, but from noon till 10 p.m., it totally takes care of the place. Just little air collectors, nothing special. I didn't have to build any storage, mechanism, and I didn't have to tear up a concrete floor to put slab, put pipes in it or anything. Air collectors it can work.
Do you want to say anything about this book that I have here in my lap?
Well, if you want to know about solar air collectors, there's a book called The Complete Handbook of Solar Air Heating Systems. It was written in 1983, and the prices, of course, are way out of date, and we've got better techniques, maybe. I always have the sheet metal bent up special at this point. I like the stuff that we make metal roofs out of.
So if someone wants to move beyond this book in terms of efficiencies, and is there a way to contact you or?
Oh, you can try. I mean, you can look me up. I'm more or less available. I have a website that doesn't have much on it, but
what about in the future when we we kick the bucket, my friend.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, it's going to happen.
Oh, absolutely. Any minute.
Well, is there written material or documented material that people could find?
Not that I know of. See, that's the thing. Air collectors, in 1983, some people, including me, thought air collectors were worth having. Now, pretty much nobody does, except for me. And you know, I wouldn't. I mean, this house is heated by an air collector that got built in 40 years ago, and it heats my hot water and it heats my house. And I have no thermostat in my house. When I go away in the winter, it's been 30 below zero, and nothing ever freezes in here. It's 50 in here when I get back.
Not only do you have that active solar system heating the house, but you also have the passive adobe wall inside a greenhouse.
Yeah, which functions like a trom wall and heats the house, the south side of the house. But the crawl space on the north side of the house is heated by an air collector and also our hot water. And, you know, I don't know, I probably wouldn't build such a system at this point.
Would do you think we could build a porcupine tank?
Porcupine tanks, which you could look up, are not so easy to build anymore.
I know, right, but I'm wondering if it's possible to move beyond that insulation problem and create tanks that would be low cost. I don't know. To avoid, go ahead and explain that problem.
Yeah, the water heating system in this house, the solar part of it is part of the air collector system, and the hot air from the solar collector is blown around this tank. And back in the early 80s, when this was built, water heaters were insulated with fiberglass. So if you took the jacket off, you could take the fiberglass out of there and use that space as a duct to have the heat from the air, hot air, exchange the heat into the water in the tank. And that's what we did. And we enhanced the surface area of that tank with something that Bob is presumably showing you now, some bands with little tabs that we pulled up. We called it a porcupine tank, because once you put it on there, man, it was pretty easy to get cut. But anyway, that enhanced the surface area of the tank and made it a better heat exchanger. Made it a quite good heat exchanger, actually. And so then we put the jacket back on and blew air through there.
We had
It worked
to,
quite well.
we had-
Currently,
we had to
water
add
heaters-
cold water to it. We had to add cold water to it to take a shower. That's what we had in our home. on
Oh, yeah.
South River Road.
Yeah. Well, you couldn't take a shower here without burning yourself.
Yeah, and that's
That
something.
tank is like 160 degrees.
And it's air to water heat exchange, which means you really don't have that much plumbing to do.
Right. Well, and there's no possibility of freezing.
Right. Oh, I love it.
You
I
do
love
need
it.
dampers on the air to keep from losing your heat at night. But even if your damper is failing, it's not going to freeze the tank because the tank is huge. It's just going to cool it off. So. But currently, water heaters are much better insulated. And they're insulated with foam that's fully adhered to the tank and to the jacket.
God.
They put the jacket around the tank and then they fill it all with this foam. And it's not at all easy to get that foam out of there. It's not easy to get the jacket off.
There must be a molecular adhesion going.
Well, it's polyurethane is a very sticky stuff.
And if you don't get all that insulation out of there, then it insulates the water from that hot air.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So the porcupine tank is, it's a little harder to get. And I'm not sure I would do that. again. For one thing, air collectors, as described in the book from '83, there were some materials available for the solar collectors which are not available now. There used to be this aluminum material, kind of dimpled aluminum that you could buy in a roll that was a pretty good selective surface. It wasn't quite as good as what's in copper water medium collectors these days. It wasn't like 98% absorptive and 8% emittive.
Was that Galvalume?
No.
No.
No. It was an aluminum product. It
Okay.
was made in New Jersey, and they quit making it.
Oh, so it just selected from the light band the most intense of radio.
No, it was selective in the sense that it was a better absorber than it is an emitter.
Okay.
Selective surfaces are good absorbers but poor emitters.
Good. I learned something.
The emission part, that's how solar collectors lose their heat. So a
Okay.
poor emitter makes an efficient collector. And back in the day, back in the 80s, we could get this material and we could greatly improve the performance of the solar system by using this selective surface. The collectors I've built lately were black painted, which are good absorbers and also good emitters.
Yeah.
But they still work extremely well if you're using them with outside air, whereas if you're going to heat hot water, you're going to be feeding them hotter and hotter air, and they're going to work less and less well. And the hotter the temperature at which you're going to use the collector, the more important it is that you have selective surface, which is no longer easy to get. There is such a thing as a selective paint. It's not terribly selective, and I've experimented with it, and it's not very easy to use either.
Could you heat water with a regular collector, even without that selective surface material, right? Could you heat water where you exhaust the hot air so that you're heating up cooler air? Does that make sense?
No.
No.
It doesn't make sense.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense because
You'd only get the water up to...
only get the water, yeah, if you're feeding it 60-degree air, you're only going to get 90-degree water ever, because you're only going to get 90-degree air to heat it with.
Well, what if you're able to get water up to, I don't know, 100 degrees or whatever, using a simple solar collector, and then from that point on, you're not that efficient, but you've got hot water.
Yes, and that's what happens here at our house. The collector here is selective surface, but it's not terribly efficient when it's running at high temperature. It's not very efficient when it's running at high temperature. When it's running at high temperature is in the summer when the water's already quite hot and we don't need it to be efficient. It's not a big deal. In the winter, I don't try to heat my water up to 160. I heat it up to 110, and then I go to space heating so that I use the collector more efficiently. In the summer, I mostly just want the thing to run, and I get all the hot water I could ever use.
In a closed loop.
Yeah. But it runs in a closed loop, and I've seen the collector running with a 200-degree output.
That's pretty nice.
200-degree air coming out of the collector. One of the other current problems relative to those high temperatures is that the little blowers we used to get from Granger back in the 80s, some of them still have the same part number, but they don't have the same specifications.
Really?
And the motors are more efficient, but they cannot handle high temperature. So the small blowers can't be used for solar systems. The same ones we used to use. They're not the same.
What did you put, for example, on a solar collector in Aurora, my son's home there. What kind of fan? Because that's just a small collector,
I
right?
think I used a high temperature blower for it.
Oh, so you have to search for high
Yeah,
temp.
yeah. High temperature blowers exist, and they're mostly made to run the flue gases in furnaces. But they have the motors separated from the air stream.
Hey, could you do me a favor? Could you close that door?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, maybe getting a little background from all the wind out there. Boy, things are really blowing. Oh yeah, I think that's nicer. Gonna be nicer. Very interesting stuff, Andy. Thanks.
Yeah, so anyway, I mean, air systems, there are lots of people that know about liquid systems. Unfortunately, most plumbers, most of the people doing solar thermal systems are wedded to antifreeze-based systems, which are not the best. Drainback's the best. But the reason I wanted to talk about air systems is because that's what I know more about than almost anybody. And they're still useful. Even though they're in some sense, I wouldn't say exactly discredited, but nobody cares about building them. And that's okay for most of the applications for solar thermal, but there are places where air systems are an excellent thing to do.
Well, could you give examples?
Make up air for schools is one of them.
How about
schools get used in the winter during the day? They need lots of makeup air. Cheap solar collector is the perfect way to do it.
how about air to slab, like putting air into a big warehouse, for example?
Well, back in the 80s, when we were doing that sort of thing, like covering the floor with cinder blocks with the tubes lined up so that you could blow air through them, and burying little pipes in the slab and blowing air through them. That was before PEX came along. And PEX has proved itself to be a pretty good material. And when I built a garage 10 years ago, I put PEX pipes in the slab, and I got some funky old used solar collectors, and I heated it with that, and it cost me $0.05 a day to heat my garage.
And that's liquid.
Yeah, it's water.
Yeah.
No antifreeze. It's
Which
a drain back.
we're going to have another segment, maybe just
Yeah.
focusing on water.
Yeah.
What about, let's say you're just a house husband and housewife, and you've got a home that you're considering retrofitting with solar, putting something on it. Where would air make sense? For what kind of a home? Crawl space?
Yeah, I'm not as jazzed about crawl space
I
as
know.
I used to be.
I know.
But I use it here. My floors are all covered with carpet, and so most of the heat that I put into my crawl space probably goes into the dirt underneath and not into the house.